So today you join me sailing my Blaze. This is Sunday the 13th of August and it's race 3 of the Wilsonians Dinghy Club Late Summer Point Series. The forecast is for 10 to 15 knots, maybe gusting 20, and it's got everything lined up to be a cracking day, except the day before had a forecast of 15 to 20 knots, gusting 25, and turned out to be gusting well over 30. And as you'll come to see, the forecast kind of underestimated the gusts that would come through. Still, we're getting ahead of ourselves. You've just seen the start. Unfortunately, there's only 4 boats in this race, 3 Blazes and an Alto. We used to have loads of Blazes at Wilsonians, but you know how it goes. A couple of people leave, a couple of people change class, someone gets ill, and before you know it, there's not so many left, and then those of us that are still left can't always turn up every weekend. So getting 3 boats out wasn't such a bad thing. So Martin Jones, sailing 805, made the best of the start. He stayed further south than John Gowdy and myself, closer to the St Mary's Island side. There's a bit less tide over there, but I was wary that there'd be a bit less wind as well. As it turned out, he got it spot on, and John and myself were following in his wake for the first part. The Alto, of course, was mixing it with us as well. They pulled their spinnaker up. It's quite a small spinnaker on an Alto, which some people would see as a disadvantage. But when you're river sailing, it's actually much more practical. It's got a wing wang, so you can go deeper downwind, and of course on a day like today, where it's a tight reach, you can pull it up without fear of being just straight blown over. Now of course the Blaze is good on a reach as well, so we hang on to them for the first part of this race, but once they get to the downwind bit, and they can stretch their legs in this building breeze, they get away from us. I'm not sure who set the course today, but with the promise of some good conditions and high tide, they set a long one, and it turned out to be a really fun sail. It wasn't perfect because I suspect they thought the wind had a bit more west in it than it really did in practice as we got downriver, but it still gave us a bit of everything, allowed us to see bits of the river we wouldn't normally see, and was a good length. I've had a look at it on Navionics since I've been home. It's about 8 miles, which is a fair way in a single-handed boat, and I'll talk you through it as the race goes on. But let's do it bit by bit. The start was from the Wilsonians line, shown in blue. From here, we reached over to the Who Cardinal buoy, which we take to starboard, and then it was a very tight fetch stroke beat up to buoy 30, one of the shipping marks. Here, we'd bear away for a broad reach stroke run all the way down the river. So as I said, Martin made the best of the start. I managed to roll over the top of the Alto as we approached his first mark and get round in second, with the Alto just behind in third. Because John was hanging onto my transom at the start, but I think that when that first puff came, I managed to jump up onto the plane quicker than him and he missed it, so we'd managed to pull a small gap on him. So at this stage, the sun's out, the wind's in the mid-teens, and apart from the fact that it's all very gusty as it comes off of St Mary's Island, it's actually really good sailing. I struggled a bit here. The alto is right behind me and I'm trying to stay high and hold my lane to stop him rolling over the top. They can make that thing point very high if they need to, and although they sacrifice a bit of speed, once they did get over me and could crack off, they tore off. I think possibly in hindsight I should have given in a bit earlier and just let them get past. But the height I gained here stood me in good stead once we reached the mark, as you'll soon see. So as I say, once the alto had got past me, they tore off and caught Martin up, which as you'll see, kind of complicated Martin's mark round him more than he'd have liked. You see, he was a bit shy of the mark and was just starting to pinch up to it. I think what you'd have really liked to do is to freed off a bit more, put a double tack in, and he'd have still been in front of me. It's just that the alto would have been coming at him at starboard and really reduced his options. So he just pinched up, hoping he could get round. But in that way, the wind shifts when you don't really want it to. There was a bit of a header at this mark. I felt it when I got there as well. But fortunately, because of the extra height I'd gained, trying to hold the alto off earlier in the beat, it didn't affect me so much. And I could just bear away in the puff and get going. Credit to Martin, he bore away and did his penalty straight away. Let's face it, I didn't see the mark move, so how do I know if he hit it or not? So there were times on this run when we were really trucking along. But equally, there was plenty of times when the wind just seemed to die. I expect it was really still probably high single figures, so a perfectly pleasant breeze. It's just that we were already starting to get used to the wind, so things felt slow. It was a long way down here. Let me just show you the next part of the course. Because basically, from Buoy 30, you saw the last time I put this map up, we just go downriver, into South Yantic Creek, to buoy number 3. It's about 2 miles this, so it goes on a bit. So I'll skip past it and let's get down to that mark and I'll show you what happens from then on. So here we are approaching South Yantic 3. Just before I switched the camera on, I had a bit more of a lead with this on Martin. But while I was faffing around sorting out the 360 camera, he seemed to get a puff I missed and caught right back up with me. Anyway, doesn't matter, that's all part of the race. So at South Yantic 3, it's a jibe, which I'd be lying if I didn't say I was a little wary of. If we got there and if the wind was in the low teens like it had been for a lot of this run, then it wouldn't be a problem. But if we got there in one of them puffs, well, that'd be another matter, wouldn't it? Anyway, it's a jibe round South Yantic 3 and then What was obviously intended to be a beat, but turns out to be a very one-sided beat, stroke fetch, stroke reach, stroke fetch, depending on where you were on the river and what the wind was doing at the time, up to the Who Green 1 buoy that's in the entrance to Who Green Creek. As it turned out, I didn't have much to worry about for the jibe. Wind wasn't too bad, and although it's not the prettiest jibe in the world, it's safe enough. Martin followed suit and we both headed upwind. Now ordinarily, I tend to sail low and free when I'm sailing a blaze, but there was two things different in this race. One is, it's windy, and when you're lightweight, the easiest way to deal with the puffs is to just pinch a bit and head up. You don't want to do it too much or you stop, but at least you can deal with the gust. And the second thing is, I might sail low and free, but Martin does it better than I do. He's quite a bit bigger than me, I don't think he'll mind me saying. And going upwind in conditions like this are what he's good at. In past nationals, he'd often be in the top 3 on a beat like this, so I know it's what he's good at, and there's no point me trying to match him. And like I say, this looked like it was going to be a beat at the start, so I thought I'll sail high again, not quite as badly as I did with the alto with me, but stay high, force Martin to sail underneath me if he needs to, and at least I might hold him off for a bit. Now as it turned out, the wind did head us a bit as we started going down here, and Martin had had enough of being in my dirty air and decided to tack off. I think he was hoping that this header would turn into something more significant and I'd have to tack at some point anyway, and then it would all even things out and he'd have a chance of some clear wind. As it turned out, the header went and actually turned into a little bit of a lift that allowed me to get up to the fault without tacking, so Martin ended up sailing further distance than he needed to. But like I say, Martin has a very quick low fast mode, so I think at the end of the day it didn't really hurt him that much at all, and certainly although I'd pulled a small gap by the time we get to Who Green, it wasn't that much. While you watch me sail this next leg, let me talk briefly about the Nationals this year. You see, I haven't sailed the Blaze that much, but when I bought it at the end of last year, one of the reasons was I thought I'd like to go and do another National Championships. I haven't done very many, and I don't have any particular aspirations, but it's good to measure yourself against the best sailors in the country. Anyway, this year the Nationals are at Walsash, down on the Solent. Never been there before, but it always gets rave reviews. Everyone talks about how good the sailing is, and to be honest, so it was this year, but it didn't really work out for me. Firstly, it's a very long sail out to the race area, with 70 something boats entered, and launching from just one small slipway means it takes a long time to get all the boats from that launch area down to the race area. It's probably close to an hour's sail, and then everyone's got to arrive, and then they've got to sort the course out, so it's kind of a couple of hours before the first race took place. And in that first race I finished 7th. Well, I say I finished 7th, actually I was disqualified, but I finished 7th on the water. You see, they were flying, I think it's the U flag, I still don't really know, but it meant you weren't allowed over the line within the last minute of the sequence. I was kind of ignorant of that, and although I definitely wasn't over the line at the start, I must have been over the line in that minute sequence. And of course I didn't know that until I got ashore, but I was still quite chuffed. The wind got up and the chop got up for the next 2 races, and I finished in the mid-20s. But not too bad. I'd learnt a month previous at the Easterns Championships at Sheppey, the other event I'd done this year, where again I didn't really sail to my full potential because it's very choppy, and as you can see from this film so far of the Medway, even when it's windy we get a bit of chop, but we don't have waves or anything really significant to deal with, and consequently I'm out of practice. But anyway, it didn't matter, I enjoyed it. Another long sail back to the clubhouse afterwards, but it was okay, although I must admit I was a little deflated when I realised that my one good result of the day hadn't counted. So anyway, then we get to day 2, and by now the fleet's getting a bit racier, and everyone wanted to be at the pin, so did I, and I ended up at the top of a queue that got pushed over the line. It was only me again, and to be frank, I knew I was over the line this time, but there was no point going back. There were a lot of boats around me, I'd have never found a hole, and like I say, I didn't really have any particular aspirations about winning it, so I just carried on. and I would have got a 10th in that race. In fact, that day was better all round. The next 2 races I finished in the mid-teens, and I think if I hadn't had any disqualifications, it'd have put me in the mid-teens at that point, and in a 70-something boat fleet like that, I'd have been quite happy with. But the forecast for the Sunday, it was a 3-day event, was for very light winds, and I didn't fancy that long hours sail out to the sail area, which now would even take even longer if it was light winds, and decided to call it a day, or call it a weekend, or call it the end of a championship, whatever you want to do. The other reason for doing that was that Sunday was the Medway Marathon at Medway Yacht Club, which is the one big large open event that we have at the club, and Hannah and I always like to take part in that. We won it once a long time ago in our National 12, and we always enjoy it, so I thought I'll go home, score some brownie points, do the Medway Marathon with Hannah, and just write that Blaze Nationals off as a great experience, but not much of a result. And to be honest, I'm glad I did. But it turns out they had a reasonable breeze on the Sunday, so I might have enjoyed it anyway. But we won the Medway Marathon and Hannah had a great time, so all in all, it was worth cutting my losses and coming home when I did. Anyway, back to the racing, because we've arrived at Who Green 1. Here, it's a jive onto another very broad reach run, all the way down to buoy 22, which we would tack round and come back to Who Green 1. Now again, not a lot happened on this leg, so we'll skip forward again until we get buoy 22 and we'll pick up the race again there. So I haven't spoken much about the race itself, have I, since we went round South Yandet 3? But that's really because there's not much to say. I'd got a small lead on Martin. Not enough that I could ignore him. One mess tack, or stick it into irons briefly or something, and he'd have been passed. But far enough ahead that a loose cover was all I needed to do, and to be frank, the course most of the way round was kind of join the dots. Tactically, Martin didn't have many options. It really just came down to boat speed and positioning. Anyway, we went round buoy 22. I stood on a little way before I tacked. The tide by now was going out, and I didn't want to be stuck in the tide too much, and I knew we should be able to get to Who Green if I just gave myself a bit of an advantage. Martin, of course, couldn't just follow me. He tacked immediately at the mark and did what he does best. Footed off, sailed fast. And in that way you'd expect, he did actually come back at me, probably got briefly in front, but because he was lower, and because I was almost laying the mark as we get to the other end, I managed to stay in front. It was a long beat this, and I'm not sure I sailed it as well as I could have done. By now, we're best part of an hour into the race, and my brain's getting a bit fuzzy. It's kind of pinching more than I should have pinched. Not playing the sail as much as I should play it. The wind was a bit up and down, and halfway along here I ended up the Cunningham maxed out and a lot of kicker. And I think really I should have been easing it off a bit more in the lulls. But you know what it's like when you get tired. You take the easy option, and to be frank, I'm not sure it would have made much difference, because even though I wasn't hiking hard the whole way, I was sitting out a reasonable way and working the boat, so it wasn't too bad. I'll let this play through and I'll get back to you when we get to Who Green, because at that point things take a very distinct turn for the worse, or exciting, or scary, depending on your take on the conditions. here we are, approaching Hooghly 1 for the final time. I didn't quite make it in one tack, but I wasn't far off it. And because the tide was going out, I decided to overstand by a couple of boat lengths just to make sure I wasn't going to hit it. After all, Martin was still close enough to see me do it, and there was a bit more chance this one would have moved. From here, it was going to be a reach back over to South Yantlet 4, which we'd round onto a beat for the beat back home, having to take 31 to port before we crossed the line. All of that should have been fairly straightforward, but just as we got to Hooghly 1, the wind pipped up a knot or two. When I say 2, I really mean 10. I've no idea what the wind speed was. I think coming up to it we probably had high teens, but when we went round it and we were on this reach, it was definitely well in the 20s. The Sheppey weather station, that's 5 miles further down the river, showed a gust of over 30 knots. Now I'm not saying for 1 minute we got 30 knots, but we did get a lot. And all the blaze sailors out there can see that we got a lot, because bearing in mind we are on what we've already decided is basically flat water, look at the amount of spray that's getting kicked up into my face. You always get spray on a blaze, but it's normally a few splashes. And if you get more, it's because you've gone through a wave, or because you've dug a rack in the water or something like this. This is just spray coming off the little bit of ripples that are on the water that's just coming off the hull at the speed we're going. In fact, I've no idea how fast I'm going, but I can tell you this leg is 0.6 nautical miles long, because I looked it up on Navionics, which is something like 0.7 miles. And I don't know how long this takes, but perhaps someone can look at the timestamps and work it out. I bet when you work out, none of it seems that spectacular. But in the same way that big waves never look that big on YouTube, I'm sure this won't look that fast. But trust me, it certainly found it. Both Martin and I agreed. I wouldn't have called this leg survival, but it was certainly sailing to stay upright and not sailing to go fast. I mean, I should have got further out on the racks, but I knew I couldn't afford to dig a rack in. If the boat had dug a rack in and slowed up, the rig would have loaded up and I'd have just been spat off. So I'm quite happy I got through it. So that was the last mark of significance on the course. Now, as I said before, it's just a long beat back to 31 and the club. As with the rest of the course, this beat was very one-sided. It was a bit of an effort to get up through the faults the first time because the tide was pushing us out. But once clear of there, it was just more of a fetch to the point we call Mears, which is the corner at Gillingham, before bearing away onto a reach, down to 31 and the final beat to the line. Now I haven't got so much to film with this. Several reasons. Firstly, I'd got a bit away from Martin at this point, and although we closed right in at the line and we finished up after an hour and a half's race about 10 seconds apart, most of this leg I had a bit of a gap. But the other reason is, all that water that got kicked up onto the rear camera never did clear itself. What happened to all that sunshine we had at the start of the race? And the front camera, I don't know if it got hit by a wave or all the bouncing up and down over the chop, because as you've already noticed, the cameras do bounce around a lot on my bits of wood, as pointing down. The 360 camera had gone flat, so there wasn't so much to show. so I'll skip forward to the end. It was a cracking sail. I mean, it's always good to win, and I'm sure Martin doesn't want me rubbing his nose in it, but beating Martin on a day like that is not an easy task, and I'm chuffed with how it went. So if you've got this far through the film, I figure you must be a blaze sailor, because it's always interesting to watch other people sailing blazes, or you're some kind of hardcore subscriber. So well done, thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll get out on it again at some point, and maybe I'll put the cameras on it again.